Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final panel of this scintillating 3-day virtual FutureCon. I'm your host, moderator, Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay, Bodhi for short. I'm coming in from Oslo, Norway at the moment, where it is just past midnight, a minute past midnight. And for the next 1.5 hours, it is my pleasure to introduce this panel that will discuss decolonize the future, strategies and solutions to emerge from the shadow of AngloSF. So a quick and a short introduction to our distinguished speakers and panelists here today. So I have Chinelo Onwalu, who is a Nigerian writer and editor currently living in Toronto, Canada. Her stories have been featured in Slate.com, Uncanny, Strange Horizons, as well as in several anthologies, including the award-winning New Sons, original speculative fiction from people of color, edited by Nisi Shaw. It's a lovely book. More details can be seen at her website, chineloonwalu.com. And all the links are also on, of course, the website, FutureCon SF. Our next panelist is Libia Brenda. Libia is an editor, writer, and translator, and she has been involved in many independent projects, most of which are about sci-fi, speculative, and fantastic literature. She writes speculative fiction short stories and has been published in online and print magazines, as well as various anthologies. Her work has been translated from Spanish to English and Italian, and she's one of the co-founders of the Cumulo de Tesla Collective, a multidisciplinary working group that promotes the dialogue between the arts and the sciences with a special focus on science fiction. In 2018, she was part of the Mexicans Initiative, and in 2019, she became the first Mexican woman to be nominated for a Hugo Award for the edition of the anthology, A Larger Reality, Una Realidad Más Amplia, attached to a project about said initiative. She's also edited A Timeline in Which We Don't Go Extinct. What a lovely title. A Larger Reality 2.0, a hybrid and bilingual sci-fi project that is also a video game and can be downloaded, read, and played for free at alargerreality.mx/2019. Our third panelist is Pepe Rojo, who practices interference in the California border zone, who's published 5 books and more than 200 texts in hybrid formats and genres, from SF interventions at the border crossing, speculative theory and fiction, to a philosophical dictionary of Tijuana. He's currently raising Tierra y Libertad flags while trying to survive a PhD at UCSD. And the final panelist is Vandana Singh, who was born and raised in India and currently inhabits the Boston area, where she is a physics professor at a small and lively state university. Her academic work is in the transdisciplinary scholarship of climate science and pedagogy, and several of her science fiction short stories have been reprinted in years' best volumes and shortlisted for awards. Her second short story collection, Ambiguity, Machines, and Other Stories, came out in 2018 from Small Beer Press in the US and Zuban in India, and was a finalist for the Philip K. Dick Award. I will also mention Vandana's first collection because I love the title, The Woman Who Thought She Was a Planet, and Other Stories. For more about her, please see her website, http vandana-writes.com. So welcome everyone, and welcome to the audience. So since this is the last panel, and over here it's midnight, it's slightly different time zones, and I'm sure there are some people tuning in from, well, the East as well. So I'll jump straight to the questions, and this is because this is such an exciting topic. So my first question is really, what does the panel think of when they hear the term decolonize the future, right? What does it mean? What do you think, how would you relate to this concept of decolonization? It's something that we are constantly talking about in academia in a certain way. But as writers, as practicing thinkers, how do you deal with it in your own work? So, Chinelo, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So when I think of the phrase decolonizing the future, I think of something really quite radical, which is the idea that we we are dismantling the structures that undergird what we understand. We're dismantling the very structures of what is valuable, what is worthy, and how even we tell stories. So I don't know that any of us, even though I think almost all of us come from colonized lands, I don't think any of us really understand fully what it means to have been colonized. There is a vast stretch of knowledge, of understandings, of cultural competencies, of languages, even that are simply lost. There are histories that we should know that we don't, because part of the colonization project is the destruction of a people until they believe what you want them to believe, right? And so when we're talking about decolonization, we're talking about a radical act of recovery, where it is, we may never ever understand the full scale and scope of what we lost, but maybe going forward, there is a way that we can recover ourselves. And I think that speculative fiction and science fiction is a radical way of doing that. It it does require, though, that we question everything. I mean, that is even the understanding of what science is, what fiction is. The panel that I had before was talking about, Nigerian and Ugandan futures, and we one of the things we talked about was how what is considered speculative in one space is not speculative at all on the African continent. When people tell a realistic story, it can easily involve the transformation of somebody into a goat. And that is a perfectly realistic story. That's not fiction to the person telling it. So part of, I think, what decolonization is something incredibly radical and incredibly important, as we try and reimagine ourselves in a place that is not our own. It's not necessarily always considered our own, um, and it's harder than you think, because these structures have embedded themselves quite deeply in our psyches, and so when we're trying to bring them out and pull them out by the root, in some ways that is root work. It is painful, it is it is destabilizing, but that is what decolonization is.
That's such a fantastic answer. Oh, I want to go more into it, but I want to hear what the rest of the panel thinks and then come back to some of those terms like dismantling, destabilizing. I like those words. Libya, what do you think?
Well, I like a lot what Chinelo said, and I agree. And I was thinking a lot about the term of decolonization. And because I live in a country that is in a geographical position of a very strange situation, because we are the south neighbors of the United States. From the present, my way of living colonization, it's very invisible unless you wanted to look at it. Because I am speaking English because I am the neighbor of the United States. I consume music and movies and science fiction that came to me from the United States. And then if I think of decolonization, I think how Mexico as a country inside, it's a racist and still like colonizer country, because the white quote unquote people and the indigenous people are not necessarily in dialogue, and how the state has managed that, the culture inside the country. So there is stuff to do inside, and there is stuff to do to the outside. And I think also that we need radical actions, and it's a lot of work, and it's not going to end today or this week or this year. And we have a lot of issues to tackle. One of the things I became like in a nutshell is, for instance, in science fiction and fantastic literature, number one, we in Mexico are more connected with English speaking fantasy and science fiction than with Latin America, which to me it's kind of a mistake. And it's an odd situation. And number two, why we think that to make something right, to have a success as a writer, for instance, is to publish in English. Why we insist in go to that market, to that land of thinking that is the dominant land. So one of the answers that is not as easy as it sounds, but one of the answers could be, we should stop trying to get there. We should stop trying to go to those markets that has no space for Mexican or Latin American writers unless they prove themselves and probably connect with other countries and from other roads. And if there are no bridges or there are no roads, we have to build them. We have to excavate. We have to reach another way to publish, another way to write, and another way to read. That requires a lot of job, and that requires a lot of time, energy, and people. But I am, for instance, this FutureCon, it's a very good example, because I am here in this panel today thanks to a Brazilian group of people that knew me through the internet back in April. Oh, there is a street vendor passing right now. I hope the noise is not too loud. They are selling corn, cooked corn in a little cup. Oh, sorry. Pepe is nodding because Pepe knows exactly what it is.
I'm salivating.
I know. I understand. I have elotes in my fridge, so sorry. Anyway, coming back. So the thing is that I am now today differently from, I don't know, 1 year ago. I am more interested in talking to Ana Ruche and the people in Brazil and build communication, or in talking to Chinelo or to Bodhi, and to see a way in which we can know our literatures from our countries without having to go through United States or the English speaking market. And that is probably something on one hand too obvious, and on the other hand too difficult, because we have to translate and we have to find the ways to communicate, but we can do it. And if we are able to connect via our devices and to have these conversations, we are going to be able to have those, like that job done. And I think that is very, very important. So how to decolonize the future, starting for the present, because future doesn't exist until it arrives. And how to decolonize the future, going to the past, as Chinelo pointed out. I think it's very important not to lose where we come from. And in this moment, in 2020, in Mexico, we come from a colonized history, and we are kind of disconnected from the indigenous history of this country and Latin America also. So we need to like, I don't know if fix that, because you are not going to change centuries of history, but what are we going to do today in order to want a different result? And just to finish, we have a little convention here in Mexico called Mexicona for writers, like another 3 friends and I, Andrea Chapela, Gabriela Damian Mirabete, and Iliana Vargas and myself. We organize a little conversation because, and the tagline is imagination and future. Everything is in Spanish. So, but probably we translated. Anyway, that I mentioned that because in a panel yesterday, Yasnaya Elena Aguilar, which is a Mije person, and Mije is one of the communities in Mexico that is indigenous. We have officially at least more than 50 different indigenous groups of people. So we are talking about a cultural diversity that is not necessarily in dialogue with the middle class, no? Coming back to what I was saying in the beginning. And she was saying that if her people survive the colonization from that we don't know, as Chinelo said, we don't know what happened then because we weren't alive. But if people like her can speak Mije, which is the language of these people, and can still survive, it means that there is hope because they came from that past and they exist and they are doing like the necessary stuff, and they are going to probably survive, probably climate change, we don't know. So all that, for me, it's connected, you know, what are we doing today to change that future? And in order to not keep the colonization that we are embedded in, if that makes any sense.
Thank you so much. You know, this is kind of getting interesting because this brings in the question of Anglophone, because this is kind of the shadow of Anglophone SF. So we'll return to that in a moment. But Pepe, decolonization, decolonize the future. What do you think?
First of all, there's a very famous phrase ascribed to a Mexican dictator that says that poor Mexico, so far away from God, so near the United States. I'm squeezed. I'm on the northern part of the country, on the border between Mexico and the United States. So I'm squeezed on a closed border. So the situation is, even if it's similar to Libya, it's also kind of different because I have to deal with English in a much closer way. And the contrasts here are as amazing as they are terrible, as they are exciting. Every time I hear the word, the colonization, a lot of alarms ring in my head. I'm kind of like very wary of the colonization. Firstly, because I truly believe, as Chuck and Yang say, that decolonization is not a metaphor. And when it's turned into a metaphor, it becomes really, really dangerous. Decolonization is a claim made by very specific people about very specific things. Okay, and although I love the spirit of decolonization as a metaphor, I mean, decolonize my dreams, decolonize my reality sounds wonderful. I also think it's very, very dangerous. So I'm really liking what Libia was saying about Jasnali and about the mixed community, because I think Chinelo also mentioned it, the going back to the ways of life that have survived colonization is kind of like I think it's a matter of life or death right now. Being on a border, it's probably it's the most crossed over border in the world. And it's also probably the only border where you get the so-called first world, shoulder to shoulder with the third world, side by side. So the contrasts are really interesting. One of the examples which I want to put on the table, I've taught both here in Tijuana and I teach at San Diego right now. And even the imaginaries about the future differ greatly. People who I teach in arts and communication here in Tijuana do not see a future. They think about surviving. They're very aware that probably they want to be working in what they like in the future. And they're kind of like stealing some tools and stealing some time from the present to kind of like at least get that during their educative years, because they know they're going to join a workforce that has no place for the things they want to do. Okay, so it's a very interesting, the future collapses into the present for them. They think their life's going to be very hard looking out for jobs, very hard doing what they want to do, while just 20 miles away, I teach students who firmly believe in the future, especially engineers. We're going to change that, and we're going to do this, and we're right on the moment, and who are educated and probably driven by the idea that they can work in the field they want, and that they are the best of their generation, and they're going to excel at that. So it's easy going crazy, living on both sides of those words, because there are two realities here, and the realities don't match, even though they are complementary. Because San Diego needs Tijuana as much as Tijuana needs San Diego. So this parasitic relationship, and I don't want to say who's the parasite, and where the symbiosis turns so evil, makes me be wary of the word decolonization, because the people who are using it are the ones who have the privilege. Okay, while here in Tijuana, people are not that worried about decolonization, but they are the ones who are practicing it in living their daily lives, in kind of like surviving the very problematic times we are living it, in a much more difficult way than on the other side of the border. So I love the term, but I'm also kind of like scared of the implications it has.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I mean, UCSD, the hotbed of speculative design, where design will solve the future, right? I mean, that's kind of one of the things. But yeah, thank you. We will return to the scarier implications of that, I'm sure. Vandana, decolonization, decolonize the future.
Well, I love what everyone said, and I can relate to the things you're saying. And in fact, I really appreciate, Pepe, that you spoke about the danger of the term decolonization, and that you mentioned this particular article, which everyone, I think, who hasn't read it should read. It's by Eve Tuck and K. Wayne Yang, and it's called "Decolonization is Not a Metaphor." And so I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge, firstly, the irony of my speaking in English and all of us speaking in English about decolonization. But what this article brings through really strongly is the fact that colonization is violence. And when you turn it into a metaphor, and especially a metaphor where you kind of extend the idea, like, for instance, quoting from the abstract, it says that decolonization brings about the repatriation of indigenous land and life. It is not a metaphor for other things we want to do to improve our societies and schools. The easy adoption of decolonizing discourse by, for instance, they talk about educational advocacy and scholarship, calls to decolonize schools and use decolonizing methods, that may well have a diluting effect that hides the fact that colonization is violence. And so I definitely, I want to acknowledge that. And the other thing, that what it means to me, coming from a country that was colonized by the British, and I was born in an India that was only 15 years free of the British. Well, that was when I was, that tells you how old I am. But it's not just that it destroys everything. That's true. It destroys the past and your connection with the past. It destroys history. It destroys ways of thinking. But it also, it's that shadow, that long shadow of the colonial presence is there even after the colonizers have gone. And I think, and that's why I resonate with what you said, Chinelo, about how it has to do with recovering, not just like, being able to feed people and take care of people's needs, which is a very basic and urgent thing to do, but also recovering ways of thinking and coming up with new ways of thinking, new ways of constructing reality, new paradigms, new epistemologies, where new is a hybrid of the very old and the whatever has come up through the experience of colonization. And at the same time, there is a danger of a reactionary approach to colonization as well. As for instance, I know very well from Indian history, where a golden past is imagined, not in relation to the colonizers who have left, but in relation to the people, the marginalized people within the country, including tribal peoples, including people of different religions and so on and so forth, and including one of the most ancient systems of oppression in the world, which is the caste system. So we have our internal forms of oppression, and we have, in fact, it's very important to acknowledge that colonialism has not really gone. If the people in power are practicing it on certain groups of other people, using the same playbook as, for instance, was used against indigenous people in the Americas for a very long time and is still used, then colonialism is not over. It's just taken a different form. And we have to acknowledge colonialism within our areas as much as in the world globally at large. And so for me to decolonize means to see these uncomfortable realities. Like in the US, as a woman of color, I do not have race privilege. And but when I'm in India, I have caste privilege. And so I cannot condemn racism in the US if I do not at the same time acknowledge the brutal injustice of the caste system in India. And so to me, the whole decolonizing project is a complex one, where we have to look into our own discomforts and our own systems of oppression. And so if we take Tuck and Wang seriously and say, well, okay, what does it mean to decolonize the future? It's about alternate epistemologies, but I think to me, it's also about imagining people who have been marginalized, taking back their spaces, and so that we get away from this hegemonic, monstrous, world-destroying, world-devouring system that holds us in thrall.
Thank you so much for that, Vandana. I think this kind of I mean so what you bring up now is in a way connected to the engines not just of colonialism but also of global capitalism, and this is kind of like, so one of the three things or the three broad themes that I can kind of see so far in the discussion. So there's the question of genre, which is science fiction, speculation, alternative futurisms, and so on. Then there is the question of history, so what has been written out, what needs to be brought back, what has survived, and so on. And then there is the question of language, right? So what are the tools of our speculative expressions, and so on and so forth. And I think to a certain extent, all of these are connected also to the engine of global capitalism in that sense. So I will take actually an audience question, because that kind of ties into the second part of the title of this, which is strategies and solutions to emerge from the shadow of AngloSF. So there is a question which is really about the dominance of the Western publishing industry, and what role does that have to play in decolonizing the future of SFF? Do we find any strategies here? How do we, to put it in a slightly different way, since we are, so many of us, using English, or we are trying to break into a market that is dominated with Anglophone voices, right? Or we are writing in conversation with those voices. So what are the strategies to emerge from the shadow of Anglophone SF, or the shadow of that publishing industry? So yeah, you can start, Vandana. You want to go first?
Me?
No. I have to unmute. Getting used to this new way of communicating. All right. Yeah, well, there are multiple ways to think about that. I think that one of the things that I have to own is my privilege as somebody who's writing primarily in English, and getting published in the West mostly. Firstly, I make it a point to have, like I think Chinelo said in the earlier session on African SF, when I write, I don't think about the audience, but after I've stopped writing, I do, or maybe while I'm thinking about writing and aren't actually writing, I do. And one of the most important things for me that I've done is to always make sure that my work is appearing in India as well, and to think about my own people as the central audience, in the sense that I'm writing for the world, and I want people around the world to read my work. I want to be influenced by people around the world from every continent, but I want my central audience to be the people, of India, where I was brought up and raised, and so on. So, and I think that it's a very complex issue. I think that, well, in the beginning, many years ago, when I first started writing and publishing, writing to publish, people, I mean, I was the odd one out. I was one of the few, dark-skinned faces in science fiction conventions, and that's a debt I owe to African American science fiction writers, because because of them I started to feel less and less alone, and then there were people from other places as well. But in any case, I think there was only a gradual realization among editors and publishers of science fiction and fantasy that the stories we had to tell were important stories, and that they were important in their own right. And for a long time, like Ursula Le Guin herself had to deal with the fact that the covers of her books, which were mostly about brown and black people, had white-skinned characters on the cover and so on. So, and then, with me, I still remember before I published my first story, an editor telling me at a conference that, oh, you're a multicultural writer, so why do you want to write science fiction? You should be writing about arranged marriages and spices and things like that. It was like, oh, so, either you get put in a box like that, or people don't think that what you're writing is important, or if they're reading it through the lenses of their stereotypes and prejudices, and then they're not able to make sense of what you're saying. And I've actually been told to change things that didn't make sense to white editors, which come from my internal experience of being Indian and growing up in India. So, it's been difficult, but I think now that there's so many voices of color in the US, and now there's such a growth of international SF, and yay for FutureCon being structured the way it is, I think it's easier for that to happen. But we have to acknowledge the fact that we still have privilege. Writing in English, being published in the West, even if we are also published in our own countries, so I feel like I have to, in a way, use the privilege I have to bring out other writers from India, but also to pay attention to writing that's happening in non-English Indian languages. And there's plenty of that. And I try to do that as much as possible. But it's a very complex question. So I will stop here and let others illuminate it.
Thank you so much, Vandana. I would like to hear from Chinelo, actually, because again, it's the question of writing in Anglophone or writing in English versus writing in other languages. So do you have any thoughts on the question of strategies? What strategies do we find useful in addressing the Western publishing industry, for instance?
I think strategies, that's always a really difficult one, because what would be a strategy for, let's say, someone who has white skin privilege, light skin privilege, versus someone who doesn't, someone who has gender privilege, who's male, versus someone who isn't, someone who has, economic privilege versus someone who doesn't. those would all be different, right? The thing is, right now, we can't escape the system in a lot of ways. The structure is what it is. Even if I decided that I would go the, Ngugi wa Thiong'o route and never write again in English, I can't. One of the things that was, taken from me in a real way is my native language, right? Which I can understand and speak moderately, but cannot write it, because one of the things that was destroyed was our writing system. We are trying to get it back. There are a lot of people who are working on figuring out an Igbo alphabet, but none of those things have been widely taken up. So in some ways, this is what we have, right? And we have to sort of navigate our way within it. I think that working to make sure, so one of the things that I did when I was an editor at Omena now was every time I saw a name that I knew how to pronounce, I would take extra time to read that story to make sure that I wasn't looking it over, or I wasn't subjecting it to standards, the Western standards that had been sort of embedded in me. Because the idea of what is a good story, what reads well, is a very Western one, right? One that isn't often investigated or broken down. And so I think there is only so much that I think that we can do. And I think that one of the things we have to be careful about is not to sort of take on the entire burden of dismantling a global system of supremacist thinking that's gone on for, a very long time, and not to then, also say that, okay, this one work is going to do the work, but to try to push back in a lot of different, very small ways, even if it's something as little as, I will not italicize, my, like, things that are not in English for you. I will not over explain a thing that I think is easily understood through context. I will not try to make it make sense for you. If you don't get it, you don't get it. It's not my fault. But at the same time, also, applying that when you read other people's works, and not demanding that those works also conform to whatever it is that you view. Because the truth is, as someone who has been educated in the West, which is a privilege in and of itself, I do have some pretty Western ideas of what I think a story should sound like and look like. And I would not be surprised to learn that stories that I rejected at Omena now were rejected because I was going by that very flawed paradigm. So I think one of the biggest strategies is basically to start by being aware of your own biases, and by being aware of the systems that you're floating around in, and then making really conscious and clear efforts to try and overcome them as much as you can. Being aware, as Vandana mentioned, of your own privileges is supremely important, because I think that there are a lot of ways that we can entrench ourselves in our spaces and say, I am the most oppressed. It's something you see with white feminism, where white women are like, everything is misogyny against women and nothing else, and that's the end all and be all. And it's it eclipses all other kinds of axes of oppression as well. So being aware is I think one of the best strategies of your own biases, of other people's biases, of your own privileges, and working from there. I don't know what else I can tell people. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So this is kind of interesting, because this is what we are in a way talking about is the layered nature of colonization, right? So the things that it has kind of destroyed, so questions of language, writing systems, and so on. And I think, Libya, you brought up the point earlier about indigenous communities. And of course, there is the whole movement of indigenous futurisms, right, which is trying to kind of address some of these concerns. So there are what one can say, there are internal, or one can say internal colonization processes that have happened, which have destroyed, for instance, scripts and communities and genocide of indigenous peoples and so on. And then there is the question of colonial history, which has kind of had an impact on the languages that we use. So for instance, whether we are using Spanish or Portuguese, for instance, in the Latin American or South American context. And then there is, of course, the Western publishing Anglophone industry. So it's kind of like a layered thing. So Libya and Pepe, I kind of want to know what your thoughts are on untangling this kind of these layers, and finding strategies of decolonization, kind of taking back the future in a way from Anglophone SF. How do you deal with that, Libya?
Well, thank you, Bodhi. It's hard because it's something. Personally, I have started to think of these issues very recently, because of my situation, because of my own privilege. I love what Vandana said, that what Chinelo said. I think it's very powerful. I think it's complicated from Mexico because we read and write in Spanish, but through the English editorial domination, we don't really belong to the West, but we are not in our own cultural side. I don't know if that makes any sense. In any case, I think we can do a lot of things in a small scale. Like Chinelo said, we are not going to destroy the system, or we are not to change the whole thing, but we can do what we have in our hands. I have a good example at what Chinelo was saying right now about small decisions in what we published or what we write. Strange Horizons, the magazine, invited me to be the editor of the issue of the Mexican special issue. Right now I am reading the short stories, and we are going to publish that issue in November. And one of the things that Strange Horizon always does, and we did in this call for submissions, was to say, if you are from Mexican origin and you live in Mexico and you write in an indigenous language, send your stories to us. In Spanish, because we, unfortunately, we cannot read Mije or Zapoteco or any of the languages. But if you send your stories, we are going to read them. And I have read a couple of stories that are not in a Western shape, not in a traditional, the traditional idea of what is a short story or the same structure, or even the idea of what is a fantastic or a speculative fiction. And it has been very hard to me make a decision based not only in what I think I know, but on the context, because it's like, is this really a short story that is not good, or is just that my own veil is not allowing me to read this in a more broader way? And to me, that is a huge responsibility. I feel like, oh my God, because I have in my hands more than 250 short stories from all over the country that in other ways I could not read. That is a privilege, immense, but it's also a huge responsibility. So to me, it has been a very interesting journey, because I have like right now I feel like I have a view of the whole like writing in the country, a small like sample, and at the same time I'm gonna go to the English speaking market and say, this is what we write in Mexico. So right now I am living through all these like decisions, and like I am questioning myself all the time. And I think if I take a little step back and I try to calm myself down and to say, okay, you have to do the job and you are going to do it anyways, what can we do in order to not think in a colonized way or in a colonizing way? Number one, to make questions and to examine everything and to rethink the things that we think we know already. And also to build community. I think that I'm making a little bit of a jump here, but I really believe that if we build community, a community is small, like per se is a small thing. It's not hundreds and thousands of people. It's just some people. And you have to communicate and you have to like make an agreement and to go forward. I think we need to build communities. And I also think that if we stop thinking that we have to publish for the huge market that dominates the science fiction and fantasy world, and we can publish for just a small community, that is not a bad thing. And it's not a failure, and it's not like, why don't do it? Why don't we do it? Why we have to do all the time the huge thing, the richness, I have to reach the Western world. No, I don't. I don't have to. So questioning those things that we sometimes do by like a sort of an inertia, I think that is a way of reshape the things, because we are going to have a different result. And I also think that also we need to read more works in our own languages, and we need to try to communicate with the people that write those works. That doesn't mean I am not going to read another English written story, short story or novel. Like I am never going to stop reading Ursula K. Le Guin, for instance. But also, it doesn't mean that the world suddenly is going to see what Mexico is doing or not. It's just to do what I can do with the conscience that what I am doing. You know, I feel like I am like rambling here, but those beats are what came to mind when I listen to you, and when I think what is going on here in Mexico and how we are always looking up and trying to reach that editorial market and that language and that West, like a sort of a promised land. And I wanted to take a step back and think, is really that what I want? And it doesn't mean I'm not going to translate my own work, but it doesn't mean that I am going to think that that is the ultimate goal. And I think we can do that from a lot of different like trincheras, like different points. So those are my thoughts, Pepe.
It's a really interesting question, and it's one that's also overwhelming. Oh my God, they think I have an idea about how to, like a decent strategy, because I don't. It's kind of my main linguistic weapon against Anglophone, not just science fiction, but culture, is Spanish, which is also colonizers' language. And the idea of science fiction in Mexico, it's not only affected by the United States publishing, but also by Spain's translations of Anglophone science fiction. I remember in the 80s, I received stories that were written in colloquial Spanish because people thought that was the way you wrote science fiction, because it was the science fiction they had read from Spanish translations. So it's kind of like a double hit on Mexico, which is a kind of weird. The idea of self-examination, constant self-examination, has been thoroughly and very well explained by the rest of the panelists. But I also think that maybe we don't have strategies, but we have tactics. And tactics are kind of like day to day. And we have talked about those tactics, which I think are really important because it's like a day to day, the day to day work. The idea that if I publish in English, I also try to publish in Spanish. To me, it's kind of like important. The idea of how to read stories. One of the things that I think it's really important is to experiment. I mean, if we don't have any answers, let's fuck up. Let's make mistakes. Let's try different things. Because if we don't have an answer, then if we don't try different things, we're never going to get out of the same thing we have been going through, and it's not a very nice thing in several ways. I'm all for experimentation. I'm all for trying out new things, even if they feel wrong, even if they feel they don't belong to the market. And by experimentation, I not only mean the subject of our stories or the theme of our stories. I'm also thinking about books are part of colonization. Short stories, the format of the novel is a colonizer's format. Even reading in screens. So it's also about breaking formats, not just themes and subjects. The idea of community. I mean, doing fanzines and handing out things for people nearby just to read, even if they are small. If you have to pay it for themselves, taking science fiction out of books. With the dangers of speculative design already on my mind, buddy, you raised the alarm. But it's, I mean, science fiction has always looked at the edges, at the fringes, and it's the science fiction I'm most excited about all the time. So sometimes I feel that we have to stop. Oh my God, that's a lapsus. We have to stop seeing our work as product. If we still think of our work as product, we are just reproducing the same machinery we have been taught to reproduce. So it's a story. It's about community building. It's about having a conversation with somebody else. It's about finding something in yourself that you don't even know about and that your reader may understand better than yourself. But if we keep on thinking if we keep constraining our writing as a product, as where can I sell it, where can I place it, all of those things, we're actually accomplishing very little. So getting out of that product mentality, it's probably economic suicide also, and I'm very well aware of it. But it's also one of the things I try to do as much as I can while still bringing bread to the table. So those are kind of like the tactics that I think we should be experimenting with, and that I kind of like to be reading and finding, because I think if we don't try things in a different way, we're not going to get out of the problems we have diagnosed. So yeah, I think that's a pretty important tactic.
Thank you so much. Strategy tactic. I mean, when I wrote my dissertation way back on colonial era science fiction, and this was kind of like a distinction that I used, that colonial writers in Bengal, in India, you know, there's the difference between strategy and tactic and so on. So this is absolutely fascinating. Now, one of the things I kind of want to bring up, because we're almost now, there are a lot of audience questions coming up. So before we turn to that, I kind of want to bring up one more, and this is the point about, you know, alternative epistemologies, or you know, we've spoken about different idea of science, and this is something that I also deal with in my work. So Kalpavigyan as a different idea of science that is embedded in Indian SF. And Pepe, you just spoke about breaking formats, right? That there are formats that are also colonizing. You know, so my question really is like, so we have spoken about the Anglophone, we have spoken about the publishing industry, but maybe we should raise the question of the future now, and place the question of the speculative and the future in dialogue with each other, because I think that's kind of one of the more productive tensions. Where do we go from here? What tactics do we use in a way? Or what is really the role and purpose of these alternative epistemologies, or alternative, or breaking the format? How do we bring them in? How do we imagine this different kind of future? So Pepe, do you have some thoughts?
Who? Me?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
probably the most interesting experiment I've ever taken a part of was a series of 10 science fiction interventions right at the border, done with 200 students from Tijuana University, in which they were, okay, so we're going to do science fiction interventions at the border. This was 10 years ago. So it was like, so what are we going to do? And it was like, we have no idea. We have to come up with something, okay? So it was like, it was right on the border. It's probably one of the most surveilled places in the whole country. So it was kind of like daunting, but at the same time, the street gave imagination a whole different power and a whole different dynamic. And even if most of the things we did, and for example, we created right at the border a swap meet of the future, and we charged students took their things, and we printed our own currency. So for 2.5 hours, we were kind of like a nation of our own, printing our currency. We exchanged pesos and dollars into our currency, so people could buy there. So it was like a little nation state for 2.5 hours. The students invented a saint from the future to whom you pray for when technology goes wrong. So they built up a whole mythology and an iconography of the saints, and we made a procession through the streets of Tijuana, and people came along and asked us, how can I join? Do you have a church? Do you accept donations? And it was like, oh my, we were scared of the response, because we were also walking in a place where people do not know how to deal with science fiction. When we finally had to explain that we were actually working at the university, the questions were like, okay, so this is not real. No, this is not real. We published a paper dated 30 years in the future that said border closed. And people came running to us and asked us, at what time? Okay, because they didn't read the fine print where the 30 years after what was explained. I think probably that's kind of like one of the most illuminating experiences. Also, because even if the imagination of the students was mostly dystopic, because it's cheap to do dystopia, you just photograph the world out there. It's not hard to do dystopia. It's a kind of like a form of realism right now. Even if most of the content we produced was dystopic, the experience itself was utopic. We had so much fun doing it. We had so much fun being there and actually confronting the problems that the street raised, that the relationship between the 50 students that gathered each Thursday was utopic in itself. So it was very interesting that the content was dystopic, but the experience was utopian. So, for example, that's one of that's kind of like the things on top of my head on your question, and I mean, I've been thinking about that experience for 10 years, and it changed my life.
Thank you. Libya.
Can you please tell me the question again?
So we're talking about the idea of the future and speculation, and where we would place this in terms of how we are thinking about all these questions of decolonizing, Anglophone SF, but moving further onwards to just the question of the future and speculation, alternative epistemologies, building other worlds. So you have made a game, for instance. So so I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, we need imagination. We need the power of building stuff in our heads in order to bring it to the world. And I think that is a very important thing, because speculative fiction literature in general, it's built on imagination, even if that is a dystopian, cheap, 5 minutes from now short story, for instance. So the imagination that the guerrilla like situation that Pepe was describing, I think it's very powerful because people around all those students were like triggered in their imagination. There was happening something that it was not happening in real life. And that's what literature does. And that is something very, very powerful. And that's why imagination is so dangerous for the capitalism and for the people that is in power. Now, that being said, that game that you referred to, A Larger Reality 2.0, in which Pepe has a piece of poetic and audio stuff. He's one of the authors that collaborate in that work. That I made in 2019 was a very, very interesting thing, because I make a bridge between science, and we question that what science is and the concept of science. And I have been working closely with people that is a scientist, and it's one of the running discussions, how we define what science is as what is not, etc. And that's why we are always stating that you need imagination to make science, as well as you need imagination to make literature or art. And that video game became to life because I make like a call for people to write short stories, very, very short stories based on a scientific theme, and also artists that made illustrations. And then I work with people that made a dynamic version online. But because our literature is not a product, and I completely agree with that, I proposed that we made it in an open access format. So that's why it's free. And this part of the statement is not as in free beer. I'm not giving you beer to come to my bar. I'm not giving you beer as a favor. I'm not giving you these short stories or these scientific articles as a favor. I am giving these because it's my work and it's a way of inhabit the world. So what can we do? What have we done apart from build community to believe in the power of imagination in the very broad sense, and to have horizontal conversations like this one? Maybe this is a very small answer, but I really believe in that. And we have been warned that the time is shortened. So please, the other panelists can now talk.
Thank you so much. Chinelo, your thoughts? Unmute.
Sorry, this is, I think this is a very complicated question, to be honest. And I'm not super sure that I have like really good answers for it. Particularly because for me, I consider myself someone who's just starting out in her craft in a lot of ways. I'm still discovering a lot of things about myself, about how I write, what it is I mean, it's coalescing what it is I want to write about, but the how of it, the formats to use, the formats to explode in doing this are still something that I am figuring out. I do think, though, that there are so many interesting new narrative possibilities when we try to tell our stories in ways that buck established structures and systems. There are many more ways to do it now than there might have ever been. My partner did something really interesting. We attended the Clarion West writing workshop together. And one of the pieces that they submitted, it's an intensive writing workshop where you write supposedly a short story a week for 6 weeks. And 1 week they showed up with a story that they had written entirely as a series of tweets, which, tell you, it was really something. I mean, I'd never seen anything quite like it. And it forced you to have to imagine, project the background character, because it was as if you had a character living this alternate life in this alternate world and just tweeting about it. So all the normal like contextual understandings that we would normally have in that situation, you'd have to now infer. And it was really interesting. One of the things I'm seeing is as video games, you know, Libya is probably knows a lot more about this than I do. As video games are progressing, there's a lot of interesting stuff being done on the indies. The big AAAs have some of the same, you know, ideas. Here's a virgin, unconquered land. Go through it, do tons of violence to the people in it, and discover and open up all these, like, you know, places on the map, which in a lot of ways is basically the colonial project, just in a little video game form. You walk into people's homes and take their shit. You smash their property, you know. You defeat the bad guys who, you know, were there before you were. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on. But when you think about, when I look at some of the indies out there, people who are trying to tell their stories in these like visual ways, there are a lot of ways that they're doing it that aren't necessarily the same pathways and structures that we are familiar with. For me, it's my own project is really about like excavating the ways that I've been taught to think, and seeing if I can write in ways that interrogate that, in ways that complicate that, in ways that make it hard for me. I think if I'm doing the work and it's easy, then I'm not doing the work, am I? So that's sort of where I kind of stop with that.
Thank you so much. Oh, I wish we could talk more about video games, actually. Well, we are running out of time. Well, we have half an hour. Vandana.
Well, this is a really wonderful discussion, and I wish we had more time. I have like, you know, half a dozen questions for each of the panelists. But yes, so how can we not speculate about the future when the future, as the people in power presented to us, has been shown to be a sham, doesn't exist? Not only has their pyramidal power structure destroyed a lot of possibilities, but the illusion itself, I mean, if people hadn't realized it before, I think COVID-19 has told us something, that you know, this security that we were promised by modernity, by neoliberal capitalism, that doesn't really exist. And so how can we not be speculating about the future? But of course, it's true that the people in power are not just speculating, but they're planning for futures that are not necessarily the futures we want. And we know that when we look at the new space race, for instance, being led by people like Jeff Bezos and Peter Diamandis and Elon Musk, we know that when the World Economic Forum decides to take on climate change as a challenge to overcome, and there are few things scarier than climate change, and that's probably one of them. When the powers that be decide that they have the solutions and that they have the right to impose their solutions on the rest of us. And you know, part of it is also, you know, like you all have said, in different ways, that it's so much about interrogating the ways that we ourselves think and the kinds of systems in which we are immersed. So for instance, I'm a physicist and I love physics, but I have to recognize the relationship between science and colonialism. And there's a deep entwined relationship between science and colonialism. Science, as we know it now, comes from a particularly, a very specific social historical context. And that's not what science necessarily is going to be in the future. Well, not if I have anything to say about it. Well, I'm not trying to blow up my role in this, as you all have pointed out, we can play small, but hopefully, useful, significant roles. And part of it is to recognize that there are things that science doesn't see, that, for instance, indigenous ways of knowing have seen. And our notions of thinking about things as products, as Pepe put it, or as commodities, or as Libya put it, to think about, well, we have to go for the biggest markets instead of having the courage to say, let me go for the small markets, the regional language markets, and even the term market, like, why is everything a market? And so questioning all of this stuff, and even questioning, the compartmentalization, that the mechanistic paradigm that arose with Newtonian physics, that arose with colonialism, questioning that, like, why should it be that, why should our spaces be so compartmentalized that we can't, for instance, be comfortable with leaning out of the window and calling to the guy selling the roasted corn and getting some, and then so that we can vicariously share in that, or having a baby on your lap while you're talking about your science fiction. Why do we accept this compartmentalization? So in terms of decolonizing the future, taking back, but also recognizing ourselves that the seeds of those sort of violence are also within us. And if we are blind to that, then we will commit those sort of things too. So it's a question of dissolving the boundaries between the personal and the political and the world, the local and the global and all of that, and not saying one versus the other. Oh, thank you, Chinelo, that's lovely. And not one versus the other, but both, and examining the relationships between the local, the global, the personal at large, and also human and nature. And that's a utterly ruined relationship in modernity, which is why we are facing the horror of climate change. So, and I think it's people at the margins that we really have to listen to, because for one thing, being outside the power structure, they have not necessarily bought into it as much as the rest of us have. And so perhaps their visions, and their continued access to whatever remains of traditional knowledges is going to help us through this. And I just want to end by saying, Bodhi, that mentioning a project that you and I are both involved in, which is a climate justice project looking at climate justice in India. And it's been delayed by the pandemic, but it's still ongoing, where we are bringing 5 writers from marginalized communities, including Adivasi indigenous communities and Dalit communities, to bring to us their visions of what a future might look like. And again, to use that utopic imagination, and again, utopia in the sense of, not in the sense of a stagnant, perfect place. I'm not talking about Thomas More's utopia, but utopia as a kind of social dreaming, as a kind of way of thinking, a radical, in fact, I think Chinelo said this very beautifully in the African SF workshop, that it's a radical act to imagine yourself in a future, and a radical act to think of the future despite the times we live in, despite the dire and horrible times we live in, the future as being better than what we have now.
Thank you so much for that, Vandana, and thank you so much, panel, for all your amazing insights. Yes, I too wish we could keep discussing. There's so many things here, but I would like to bring up some questions from the audience, which yeah, we have about 15-20 minutes. So we have a question from Francisco, and that's about, and he asks that, would it be possible to raise a generation of national SF writers in your country simply by reducing the costs and fees of translation from English books and investing in local SF? And I kind of want to pair this particular question with another one, which is on initiatives or workshops or communities that exist on decolonizing SFF, that focus on mentoring, especially women writers, from Global South. So if you're aware of any of these initiatives, so yeah. Vandana?
Okay, I'm still on. Well, I know that my friend Anil Menon does a bunch of speculative fiction workshops in India that are kind of similar to the Clarion model, perhaps in some ways, but very much homegrown in others. And as far as I know, right now, those workshops are Anglophone workshops. I know that there are many, many writers in the various Indian languages writing SF in India. And I would very much like to see a kind of cross-linguistic conversation because I want to be influenced by writers from other parts of India as well as the world. And in fact, reading Bengali science fiction in translation was a huge moment for me. So I think that the mentoring thing is a brilliant idea. I think Anil's doing a great job there, but I think we really, really need to extend it to other languages.
Pepe, you mentioned a workshop and a con earlier.
No, not exactly a workshop, but I can say, well, number one, I don't know nothing about video games. I have to make that clear, because the video game that we have is a text-based video game in a retro way, and it's not about colonization. It's about you are lost in a planet and you have to fight a virus. So that being said, here in Mexico, we are building communities. And about the Francesco asking about raising a new generation of writers, I'm sorry, I don't know if we have to raise them. I think we can offer workshops. I think we can offer dialogue. And in my case, I am an editor, but I don't have money or an editorial per se. And I cannot fight the whole system here in Mexico that it came from Spain, it came from other countries, and the huge conglomerates of the publication system. But what can I do? It's the equivalent of a fanzine way of doing things. Doing small publications with my own, like what I have in my hands, or make like we make in the first book that we published, and we went to the WorldCon 76 also with Pepe. We made a Kickstarter campaign. So there are small ways to do things that are outside the huge market. The huge market is not going to just disappear, and we are not going to compete against it. We can do things aside that. So new writers, young writers, some of them have, here in Mexico at least, some of them have the dream of being published by, I don't know, Penguin Random House, but some of them are more willing to deal with the fact that we need to build new ways to communicate between ourselves. So I think it's not about not investing money, because I have no money, so I have nothing to invest. What I have is my work, and what I have is the dialogue that I can like make with other writers and editors and people. So little by little, probably also in that way that Pepe was describing earlier, we can do work, and more people we can agree with us. And at least in my experience here in Mexico right now, there is a lot of feminist groups that are reading science fiction and speculative fiction and fantastic literature, and young women that are making small communities and communicate between themselves, and trying to also like encounter the power of imagination and what we are going to do from here to then. So I agree with what Vandana said. We need like to do things in a different way, and we all said that we need to question what we have been doing now, and we can do small things to walk through that future that we want, that I do believe it's going to be better. In Mexico, this little convention that I was talking about earlier, we said we are not optimistic, but we have hope. And about climate change, about all the huge issues that we are dealing right now with as persons, as people, I think we can have hope, if not optimism, and we have to work building up based on that hope and that idea, maybe speculative idea of that we can build in the present a future that is going to be slightly better, if not for us, for people that is going to be after us. Something like that.
Pepe?
I mean, I have a lot to give some workshops that try to do them as cheaply and as often as I can, because I think right now at my moment in life, part of my work is allowing others to grow their voices and to nurture their voices so they can be heard. And heard, I mean read or seen or even heard, because I think that's important. I'm not that much interested in science fiction per se, as in having more people writing science fiction. I'm interested in more people and more voices writing whatever, and then making themselves appear in a world that needs these tools to appear. Okay, but I also think the other day I was buying some tacos, and there were two people who probably are not readers, but one of them was, I said, this is science fiction. This is reality, or this is science fiction. I mean, right now we're at a moment where science fiction helps us understand the reality we are living. It's kind of like a necessary tool to kind of like deal with the things we are living through. It gives us conceptual constructs that kind of like make us grasp something as abstract as globalization or whatever happens in this computer or artificial intelligence. I mean, it's a tool. I mean, I love the idea of cognitive estrangement, but I also think that when cognitive estrangement is constrained to the story or the novel or the movie, it loses its sharpness. I think that cognitive estrangement right now is a tool for critical thinking, because what should be estranged cognitively is this thing we call reality out there. And then to have more people thinking, oh my God, why am I standing in line for this bank? Oh my God, why do they need my picture taken for me to take money out of my bank? Oh my God, why is the sky filled with ashes from the smoke on the other side of the border, for fires on the other side of the border? I think, and that's why I love science fiction so much, that the devices science fiction uses are kind of like central to understanding the world right now, and to imagining a better future, which I think it's that I totally agree, and I love that the idea of radical stance that is that the possibility that this could be different. I think it's a lifeline. It's a lifeline.
Thank you. Chinelo, you mentioned the Clarion Clarion West earlier. So any thoughts on workshops, mentoring, and decolonizing SF in workshop spaces?
I think to actually be honest with you, I'm not sure that workshops are the places where we should be going to decolonize anything. I think their structure, the very structure, the way that they are, I mean, the very essence of them is to teach how to write, but who determines what that is, right? And that's usually a very Western model. And I've had both very good and very bad experiences with workshops. I think I would credit workshops with sort of helping me believe in myself, but the fact that I had to have an external system to validate me is problematic in itself. So yes, there is a question of mentorship, and there is a question of like how we bring other people to believe in their own visions in ways that then give them the confidence to share that vision with the world. But then there are questions of, you know, the question then becomes, are we feeding into the structure and into the monster by then going after these like, you know, validations, like publishing in the West and getting into certain magazines and things like that. So it's a push-pull for me, because part of it is, you know, there are systems that say if you do this and do that, then you are recognized as a writer. And to try to deny that and pretend like those don't exist is disingenuous, I think. But to tell somebody who's marginalized and working really hard, oh, you shouldn't be going for this because it is a colonial construct, when I benefited from it myself, is kind of hypocrisy. So I cannot speak for the systems of mentorship that are happening in Nigeria right now, because I live in Canada, and to do so would position me in a place where I have knowledge that I don't actually have. What I do have is access, and that's a little bit different, isn't it? So I think that there is an important role to play in decolonization through mentorship. I think that it sort of harkens back to the apprenticeship system, where the griots in West Africa would learn from, a young griot would learn from a master and memorize all the songs of the people and the cadences. There's this amazing video where a Yoruba griot is having a back and forth with this young griot. She's about 16. He's in his 60s, 70s. And he is singing the poetic songs in the way that he learned them. And then she's singing them back, but she's remixing them, and she's adding like a bit of a hip hop touch, or she's it's so fascinating. I wish I could find it and share it, but I don't understand Yoruba, but you can see the ways that language and history and there's, because it's telling these stories that are in of themselves speculative, is being shared and reshared and kept alive. So I don't know that anybody needs me necessarily to like go and start a workshop in Nigeria to teach people how to publish their stories in Apex or Clark's World. But I think that what we could try and maybe do is start thinking about the ways that we do tell our stories, the rich and varied traditions that we're coming out of. And then keep that in mind as we're going forward. I think that's probably the best that I can say to do, because I think the work is being done by so many people out there. And, you know, I'm a drop in the bucket. The only reason I'm here is because I happen to live in the right place and, you know the right people, I guess. But that does not somehow give me an exclusive knowledge of what is and what isn't, and what should and what shouldn't be. So maybe this is a bit of a cop-out, but yeah, that's sort of my response to that.
Thank you so much. So we have 2 minutes. I kind of want to bring up a short question on, and I would love a short response to this, in the sense that, you know, FutureCon has been an experiment in a way in thinking a dialogue between alternative futurisms and futures and global SF. So what kind of futures for global SF lie on the other side of FutureCon? Chinelo?
That is a big question. I don't know that there is a short answer to that. I mean, I think whatever futures we can imagine, really, right? There is no one future that lies on the other side. I think of time as not a river, but as branching trees, like tree branches. So we can take any path we can. The future is not determined. It's not a static thing. It is ever branching, ever changing, ever evolving, really, according to the decisions we're making now, right? So what futures lie on the other side of this? Whatever we want.
Libya?
Well, I agree with Chinelo. What future lies in front of us? What are we making of it? What we want, we have to build it. And it sounds at the same, for me at least, it sounds at the same time like daunting and immense, but at the same time it's also doing the dishes or going up every morning. Like every little thing makes the future. So we can make a decision and go towards that, or we cannot make a decision and we are going to arrive anyways. I think if we are, I'm repeating myself, but it's, to me it's important. If we are having these conversations, we are building that future. We could, if speculating, thinking, if we continue to do this, we are going to arrive to a little better place that we are today. So that's my rambling answer.
Thank you. Pepe?
I'm going to be very selfish and narrow-sided, okay? After this FutureCon in science fiction, my reading list has grown immensely. And I kind of love that my reading list now has a lot of names I don't even know how to pronounce. And I'm very excited about thinking thoughts that I've never thought in that reading list. And I agree with Livia. That gives me hope. That gives me hope.
Thank you. Vandana?
Well, to echo and summarize what some of you all said, I'll just say two quick things. One is that the seeds of 1 million futures are within each of us right now. And when I say us, I don't mean the panelists, I mean all of us. And let's hope that most of those futures do not involve Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos leading the way. Okay. And lastly, maybe we should really start by rethinking how we think about cons and workshops, like Chinelo was mentioning. Next time, let's have a discussion in song or something. Let's try experiments like Pepe was talking about. So more experimentation and multiple diverse futures.
Thank you so much. So thank you all for this lovely conversation, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. I wish we had more time, but this is also the closing panel. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll keep enjoying, and I'm sure there will be more future cons. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. It has been an honor.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great.
It was great. Yeah, it was really exciting. And I'm very happy. I had a lot to be here with all of you.
Yeah, it has been an honor.